Dr. Adrian Kwan, Lira Montesa, and Joel Ramirez, three lives intertwined by desire, betrayal, and revenge were about to be shattered in a tragedy no one could escape. Dr. Adrian Kwan moved through his days with the precision of someone who had mastered every part of his life. His colleagues admired his calm confidence, his patients trusted him without hesitation, and the hospital board considered him one of their most reliable surgeons. At home, he lived in a modern Singapore apartment with his wife, Mara Kwan, whose stable career in insurance meant their lifestyle was always comfortable and predictable. Nothing in Adrian's daily routine hinted at trouble. Yet beneath his controlled exterior lived a man who constantly searched for something he could not name. It was this quiet, inner restlessness that made him notice Lira Montesa. The day she walked into the cardiology ward. Lira arrived from the Philippines with a determined heart and a history she never talked about. Her training was solid, her work ethic was strong, and her gentle nature made patients trust her immediately. She carried herself with grace, but there was always a shadow in her eyes, something that made her seem older than her age. Adrian observed this quietly, drawn to the contradictions within her. Her presence added a new rhythm to the night shifts, and he found himself looking forward to the moments she passed him medication charts or updated him on patient conditions. The connection between them began slowly, almost unnoticed. It started with a small exchange of appreciation during a long emergency shift, then mutual reliance during stressful nights, and finally, a growing awareness that changed how they moved around each other. Adrian felt seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. Lira, who had spent much of her life fighting to be valued, felt chosen by someone she admired deeply. Their shared exhaustion, their quiet glances, and their silent understanding turned into something more dangerous than either of them expected. Meanwhile, Mara lived with a structured calmness that made her appear unshakable. She respected her husband's demanding career, never questioned his late hours, and believed in giving him space to breathe. But small signs began to disturb her. Adrian's phone, once left casually on tables and counters, now stayed locked and close to him. His explanations grew shorter. His expressions changed when she asked about his week. Though she remained composed, Mara began storing every detail in the quiet corners of her mind, building her own mental file of unanswered questions. Far away in Manila, another person watched the unfolding story without their knowledge. Joel Ramirez, Lira's former boyfriend, spent hours online looking through fragments of her new life. He remembered the day she left him, the promises she made, and the regret in her voice. His obsession, once disguised as love, had turned into something darker after she left. When he saw her smiling in hospital photos, standing confidently in her new uniform, he felt betrayed by her happiness. There was a time she had leaned on him, depended on him, cried in his arms. And now she was building a new life without looking back. The more Joel watched her, the more he convinced himself she had abandoned him for a life she didn't deserve. As the weeks passed, Adrian and Lira's connection deepened behind closed doors and empty corridors. Their moments together became an escape from their real lives, a hidden world they protected selfishly. Each step pulled them further from the safety of their structured routines and closer to a point where everything would begin to unravel. Neither of them noticed how closely Joel had begun tracking Lira's life. Neither saw the shift in Mara's quiet observations. Their affair remained a secret built on stolen moments, unaware that shadows from Lira's past and cracks in Adrian's marriage were slowly gathering around them. The peace they felt was temporary, and the danger was already moving toward them long before they realized it. Lira Montesa sat in the quiet clinic room, staring at the test report that lay heavy in her hands. The numbers on the page blurred as her heartbeat grew louder, drowning out every other sound. She had come only because the fatigue would not leave her, because her body felt different, because something inside her whispered that something was wrong. The confirmation hit her like a silent storm. She carried the truth alone, unable to breathe or think of what her future might now look like. She walked out of the clinic with steps that felt unfamiliar. As if the world around her had shifted into a darker shape, she avoided Adrian for days, terrified of causing him fear or losing the only emotional anchor she had found in Singapore. The guilt twisted inside her, mixed with dread and confusion about when her life had become so tangled. Memories of Manila surfaced like unwelcome ghosts. She saw Joel's face again, the anger in his eyes during their last arguments, the desperation in his voice, and the way he tried to control her every move. She remembered feeling trapped in a relationship that had nearly consumed her, and the way escape had felt like the only path to survival. Now she wondered if escape had ever truly happened. Adrian noticed her distance, but assumed it came from exhaustion. He continued, drifting between passion and guilt, unaware of the invisible storm growing around him. His days remained full of surgeries, medical consultations, and the facade of a perfect marriage he maintained at home. The affair had become a dangerous comfort he didn't want to let go of, even though the pressure of hiding it grew heavier each week. He had no idea that something far more threatening had already begun shaping his future. Joel, meanwhile, had spiraled into obsession. He spent more time tracking Lira's social media activity, watching her tagged photos, and memorizing her routines from posts shared by coworkers. his resentment hardened into a plan. He convinced himself that Lira had abandoned him for a better life and a wealthier man, and that she needed to understand the consequences of leaving him behind. One night, after hours of pacing, Joel bought a one-way ticket to Singapore. His mind had already crossed the line from jealousy to vengeance. He arrived quietly and kept to himself, watching Lira's world from a distance. He stood near the hospital entrance, pretending to be a passerby while his eyes followed her every movement. He followed her bus route, counted her working hours, and memorized where she lived. Each detail fed the growing fire inside him, convincing him that he had been replaced, humiliated, and forgotten. Inside the Kwan household, Mara continued, noticing changes. Adrian's once predictable habits had become erratic. His excuses turned vague. His late nights multiplied. She kept her suspicions hidden behind a composed exterior, refusing to confront him without evidence. She watched him leave home with new tension in his posture, studied the messages he tried to hide from her view, and felt her trust shrinking each day. Her silence was not acceptance, it was preparation. Lira's anxiety worsened with each passing hour. She felt unsafe in her own skin, unsure of how the infection entered her life, and terrified of hurting Adrian. She replayed every moment she had shared with him, analyzing their time together as if an answer might suddenly appear. The fear of losing him clashed with the fear of destroying him. She knew she had to tell him, but the words never reached her lips. The world around her grew smaller as her stress deepened. Every shadow felt suspicious. Every unfamiliar movement made her mind race. She sensed a presence near her apartment, an impression she tried to dismiss but couldn't shake. When she caught a glimpse of a figure that reminded her of Joel, her blood ran cold, but she convinced herself it was paranoia. What she didn't know was that the danger was real. Joel had already begun planning the next steps of his revenge. And Adrian, still unaware, continued walking deeper into a storm that none of them could escape. Joel Ramirez slipped deeper into the shadows of Singapore, shaping his revenge with quiet calculation. What started as emotional obsession had transformed into a mission he believed was justified. Every night, he replayed the past in his mind, Lira leaving him, her promises fading, her smile disappearing as she stepped onto the plane that took her far from him. The more he remembered, the more convinced he became that someone else must have taken her away from him. When he discovered photos of her with Dr. Adrian Kwan, he felt something inside him snap. The man in the pictures represented everything Joel wanted to destroy. He began his plan by breaking into Lira's tiny apartment. The first attempt was cautious, driven more by curiosity than malice. He memorized her schedule, waited for her night shift, and picked the door lock with the patience of someone whose thoughts had long been consumed by obsession. Inside, he found her world neatly arranged: simple clothes, medical textbooks, a few decorative items from home. But what caught his attention was the stack of medical prescriptions tucked inside a cabinet drawer. His eyes froze on the name and the diagnosis printed on one of the documents. Shock mingled with twisted satisfaction as he photographed every page. Joel believed he had found the weapon he needed. He convinced himself that Adrian had infected Lira through carelessness or betrayal, and now he felt a responsibility to punish him. The truth, in his mind, had already been shaped into something that validated his hatred. His imagination filled the gaps, painting Adrian as the villain who had hurt Lira and destroyed her future. Joel's plan evolved quickly after that discovery. He followed Adrian for several days, learning his routine. He memorized the hospital's back exits, the car park layout, and the times Adrian left home. Every detail became ammunition. Joel forged medical documents using the prescriptions he stole, creating a narrative of reckless negligence. He printed copies, folded them neatly, and slid them into unmarked envelopes. The first envelope went to Mara Kwan. Mara found it placed quietly in her mailbox, mixed with regular bills. She carried it inside without suspicion. But the moment she opened it and saw the grainy photos of Adrian with Lira, her world shifted. Adrian's familiar posture, the way he leaned toward Lira, and the Ocean View restaurant where they sat of it confronted her at once. Her stomach tightened, yet her face remained calm. She did not cry. She did not scream. Instead, she placed the envelope on the table, sat beside it, and studied every detail with cold focus. Something inside her hardened. She decided she would not let emotion guide her only truth. Meanwhile, a second anonymous message reached Adrian. The words were sharp, threatening to expose his affair. His hands trembled slightly as he read it alone in his office. Panic rose within him. The life he had carefully built, his marriage, his reputation, his career, felt suddenly fragile. He considered confessing to Mara, but fear overtook him. He told himself he could manage the situation, unaware he was already losing control. Lira's fear deepened when she returned home from a shift and sensed something had changed in her apartment. Her belongings were slightly disturbed, the air felt wrong, and her instincts screamed danger. She checked everything but found nothing missing. Still, she couldn't shake the dread that someone had been inside. She tried to sleep, but every creak of the building made her heart race. Joel's next step was far more aggressive. He sent the forged medical documents to the hospital administration. The accusations were severe, accompanied by the claim that Adrian had knowingly infected a fellow staff member. Whispers spread instantly across departments. Colleagues looked at Lira with pity and suspicion. Adrian noticed uncomfortable glances during rounds. Both of them felt the world tightening around them, but the storm was only beginning. Joel wasn't finished. His revenge required confrontation. It required fear, and in his mind, it required Adrian's suffering. He crafted the final part of his plan with precision, using every detail he had gathered. He believed that the pain he felt in losing Lira belonged to both of them, and as he prepared to act, neither Adrian nor Lira understood how close the danger had already come. Joel had stepped fully into darkness, and he was determined to drag them with him. Joel's plan entered its most dangerous phase when he delivered the second batch of forged documents to the hospital administration. These papers were carefully crafted to look official, detailed charts, fabricated signatures, and selective medical notes that painted Adrian as someone who had acted irresponsibly and caused Lira irreversible harm. The hospital's leadership, already aware of rumors circulating through the corridors, reacted quickly. Investigators were assigned. Meetings were held behind closed doors, and the atmosphere inside the building shifted from calm professionalism to silent caution. Everyone sensed something serious was unfolding, but few understood the depth of the deception. Lira felt the impact almost immediately. She was called into a meeting and asked to step back from her duties until the investigation concluded. Though they used careful, gentle words, the message was unmistakable. She was no longer trusted. The weight of humiliation hit her harder than the suspension. She walked out of the office with trembling hands, unable to comprehend how her private nightmare had become a public spectacle. She feared Adrian's career was collapsing because of her, unaware that someone else was orchestrating every piece of the chaos. Adrian, meanwhile, saw the situation spiraling out of control. The hospital director avoided him. Colleagues gave him distant looks, and whispers followed him down the hallways. He knew the affair had been reckless, but he never imagined it could destroy everything he had worked for. When he heard that Lira had been suspended, guilt gnawed at him. His attempts to contact her failed. She avoided his calls, lost in her own fear and confusion. Adrian felt trapped between a crumbling marriage, a collapsing reputation, and a secret he was no longer able to contain. While the hospital struggled with scandal, Mara moved with silent purpose. The envelope she received had triggered more than heartbreak. It had ignited a need for truth. She hired a private investigator and provided him with every detail she had quietly collected over the past months. She wanted answers, not revenge. If Adrian had betrayed her, she wanted to uncover the extent of the damage before making her next move. The investigator worked quickly and soon uncovered something far more alarming than an affair. An unfamiliar Filipino man had been seen near Lira's apartment repeatedly. The description matched Joel Ramirez. At the same time, Joel set his final trap. He rented a small apartment near the harbor, a rundown unit with peeling paint and rusted locks. It was the perfect place for the confrontation he had planned. Using a burner phone, he created a message that appeared to come from Lira, asking Adrian to meet her immediately and fix the chaos surrounding them. Adrian, desperate for answers and searching for any chance to salvage the situation, went to the address without hesitation. The moment Adrian stepped inside, Joel attacked with ferocity, fueled by months of resentment. Adrian barely had time to react before a blow to the head left him dizzy and disoriented. When he regained some awareness, his hands were tied, and Joel stood before him, shaking with rage. The room felt suffocating, carrying the scent of metal and dust. Adrian understood then that this was no random attack. It was personal, targeted, and fueled by hatred he didn't understand. While Adrian remained trapped, Lira received a message as well. Unlike Adrian's carefully crafted lure, hers was direct and threatening. The message revealed that someone had taken Adrian, and that she was the reason. Fear surged through her as she recognized the tone immediately. Joel's tone. She rushed toward the address, her mind spinning with fear and regret. She blamed herself for not recognizing Joel's presence earlier, for ignoring the signs, for letting her secret grow into a weapon that someone else could use. When Lira entered the building, she found the door ajar. Inside, the scene was tense and volatile. Joel's rage exploded the moment he saw her. He shouted without words, his actions more expressive than anything he could say. He had waited for this moment to confront them together, to make them understand the pain he carried. The struggle escalated quickly. Furniture toppled over, objects shattered, and the noise spread through the old building. A frightened neighbor, hearing the chaos, called the police. Sirens approached, echoing through narrow streets, growing louder as the final confrontation unfolded. Joel had prepared for many outcomes, but he had not expected the police to arrive so quickly. The trap he had set was collapsing around him, yet he still refused to surrender. His desperation pushed him toward one last, violent attempt to carry out his plan before the authorities burst through the door. The nightmare in the small harbor apartment was moments away from reaching its irreversible end. The sound of police sirens grew sharper as they closed in on the crumbling harbor building. Inside the dim apartment, Joel's breathing turned erratic. The plan he had been constructing for months was slipping from his grasp, unraveling faster than he could contain it. Adrian lay on the floor, bound and bruised, fighting the dizziness clouding his vision. Lira stood frozen for a moment at the entrance, her fear pressing against her chest as she watched the man she once loved transform into someone unrecognizable. The tiny room felt suffocating, filled with tension so thick it made every breath difficult. Joel grabbed a metal pipe from the floor, his movements jerky and desperate. He had imagined this moment with Adrian begging for forgiveness, with Lira realizing she needed him, with his suffering finally acknowledged, but the reality was far messier. Lira's horror did not look like guilt. Adrian's fear did not look like a confession. Joel felt the moment slipping, and the panic inside him grew wild. His eyes darted between them, searching for the control he no longer had. Lira stepped forward cautiously, hands shaking as she tried to steady her breath. She knew one wrong movement could send Joel over the edge. Her mind replayed every moment of their past. The early love, the possessiveness, the final days when she realized she needed to escape him to survive. She had carried guilt for leaving him behind, but now she understood that leaving was the only reason she was still alive. She felt the weight of that realization collide with the fear that he might destroy Adrian right in front of her. Adrian tried to speak, but his voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Joel moved toward him, pipe raised. The building echoed with police steps approaching the floor, and the tension snapped inside Joel like a stretched wire. He swung the pipe downward in a burst of fury, but Lira lunged forward and grabbed his arm with all the strength she had left. The impact shifted just enough to spare Adrian from a fatal blow, but pain radiated through his shoulder as the pipe struck the ground instead. The struggle intensified. Joel pushed Lira away with force, sending her crashing against the wall. Adrian tried to pull his body upward despite the restraints, driven by a mixture of fear and instinct. He understood that Joel's rage had reached a point where reason no longer existed. The room grew chaotic, objects crashing, feet scrambling, voices rising in panic. The police burst through the door. At the exact moment, Joel charged again. He turned toward the officers with the pipe raised, the madness in his eyes unmistakable. The officers shouted warnings he didn't hear. The pipe dropped from his hand as a taser struck him. Joel's body convulsed before collapsing to the floor, his rage dissolving into dazed confusion. The officers secured him quickly while others rushed to Adrian and Lira. Lira dropped to her knees beside Adrian, tears pooling in her eyes as she tried to untie the restraints. For the first time in weeks, she felt the weight of everything she had carried, fear, guilt, exhaustion crashing down at once. Adrian, weak but conscious, leaned against her for support. Their illusions of secrecy and escape had shattered completely. The aftermath unfolded in slow, painful steps. Joel was taken into custody, still mumbling fragmented words about betrayal, revenge, and love twisted beyond recognition. His fabricated documents were exposed, the evidence traced, and the truth reconstructed piece by piece. The hospital cleared Adrian of the most damaging accusations, though the scandal left its own scars. Lira's suspension was lifted, but she chose to resign, unable to face the whispers and memories tied to the place. Mata, standing outside the hospital during Adrian's discharge, watched with calm restraint. She had learned everything: his affair, the lies, the danger he had brought into their home. She did not yell or break down. Instead, she told him with quiet finality that their marriage was over. There was no longer trust to rebuild, no foundation to repair. Adrian accepted her decision, knowing it was the only possible ending. Lira returned to the Philippines shortly after, choosing distance and anonymity over the life she had built in Singapore. She walked away carrying a complicated mix of grief, relief, and uncertainty about the future. Adrian remained behind, facing disciplinary reviews, public scrutiny, and the slow process of rebuilding a life he had taken for granted. Joel's sentencing exposed the depth of his obsession and manipulation, turning him into a cautionary tale rather than the revenge hero he imagined himself to be. The story ended not with victory or reconciliation, but with fractured lives shaped by choices, secrets, and a chain of consequences none of them could escape. The tragedy left behind reminders of how desire, betrayal, and obsession can twist into something deadly, leaving everyone involved forever changed.